you ready to like dive deep into some Mexican politics today?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go for it.
So we are talking about Mexico.
Yeah?
We're going to be looking at a press conference from President Andrés Manuel López Obrador
Okay.
from just a few weeks before the 2024 election.
Wow, so this is a really critical time.
Oh, yeah. Super interesting stuff.
Very interesting.
Now,
So he's talking about all sorts of things in this press conference.
okay.
He's talking about the conviction of his former security chief,
Right.
Genaro García Luna.
Big deal.
He's talking about Spain and colonialism and their relationship.
Uh-huh.
He even takes a jab at Felipe Calderón.
It's always something with those three.
Oh, yeah, it's juicy.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Yeah, so like this press conference has a lot going on, but it really gives us a good idea of his political style,
Okay.
which, has obviously resonated with voters.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very interesting figure
Yeah.
in Mexican politics.
Sure.
And this being so close to the election, like you said,
Yeah.
gives us a lot of insight, I think, into like what his strategy is going to be going into this election.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, let's unpack it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So,
Where do we even begin?
well, I guess we can start with this Garcia Luna situation.
Okay, yeah.
So just to kind of like give everyone the background,
Yeah,
this guy was the former security chief,
right.
and he was convicted in a U.S. court for having ties to drug cartels.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's not good.
So like not exactly a glowing endorsement of the previous administration, right?
No, not at all. And I mean, you can almost hear like the vindication
Yeah.
in López Obrador's voice when he talks about this.
Oh, totally.
Because this plays so perfectly into this narrative that he's been building this whole time about like
Right.
cleaning up corruption and like,
Yes.
he's the one to do it.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see that play out.
Yeah. So it's interesting because like obviously this was a U.S. trial,
Right.
but it has such huge implications back in Mexico.
Oh, absolutely.
So for the average person who's listening to this,
Right.
like, what are the implications for them?
Well, I mean, it really, I think, feeds into this deep-seated frustration
Yeah.
that I think a lot of Mexicans feel with this
Yeah.
corruption that they see as permeating
Yeah.
society and the government.
To-
And so López Obrador is really kind of like capitalizing on that and saying like, see, I told you so.
Yeah.
Like, this is what happens
Yeah.
when you have these like old school politicians in charge.
Yeah.
They're corrupt.
Totally.
I'm here to clean it up.
It's like he's saying I'm the solution.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a very powerful narrative.
It is.
Especially when you have these very concrete examples like this.
And he's not even shy about it.
No?
He like goes straight for Felipe Calderón
Oh, yeah.
and is like, you need to investigate this guy.
Which, okay, I mean,
Okay.
you talk about like turning up the heat.
Yeah.
That's a power move.
Yeah.
To just like straight up call out the former president,
Yeah.
whether or not anything comes of it.
Right.
He's sending a message like,
Oh, no.
I'm in charge now.
Yeah. Nobody is safe.
And like, you're in my sights.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, pretty intense.
Yeah.
And then he kind of like switches gears a little bit,
Okay.
which is interesting.
Okay.
We're going from like, corruption scandals
Right.
to talking about Spain
Okay.
and like the history of colonialism.
Interesting. So he's kind of like bringing in this international element too.
Yes,
Excellent.
exactly.
Okay.
But it's interesting because even though it's like a totally different topic,
Right.
this whole idea of accountability is a thread that runs through both of these.
Okay.
So he's demanding an apology from the Spanish monarchy
Okay.
for everything that happened during the colonial era,
Right.
which like, I mean, this is not a new demand,
Right.
People
People have been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah. Other Mexican leaders have brought this up.
Right.
But he's framing it
Yeah.
in a very particular way.
Okay. I'm interested to hear how. So,
Yeah, so he doesn't just want like an apology on paper.
right.
He wants like a full reckoning
Okay.
with the past.
Right.
And he connects it directly to the social and economic problems
Oh, wow.
that are still happening in Mexico today.
Okay. So he's making a direct connection between the past wrongs and the present situation.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how he ties it to like, modern day issues of poverty and inequality.
Right.
Like, it's not just about the past.
Yeah.
It's about how that past is still impacting the present.
Exactly. And he even brings up this thing called the Fifth Royal.
The Fifth Royal.
Yeah, have you heard of this?
I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with that one.
Yeah. So basically, like back in the colonial era,
Okay.
it was this tax that Spain levied on mining in Mexico.
Oh, wow. So they were really taking a cut of everything.
Oh, yeah, like big time. And so he's using this really specific historical example to show how, like, like this pattern of exploitation
Right.
has continued
Right.
from the colonial era to today.
That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah, and he even gets like kind of visual with it.
Okay.
He talks about how the Spanish took materials from Aztec pyramids
What?
to build their Catholic churches.
Oh, wow.
Like, can you imagine?
That's bold.
Like the audacity.
But yeah, that's like a really powerful symbol
Right.
to use
Yeah.
in this argument.
And you can just tell like how much it still resonates
Right.
with him and like with a lot of Mexicans.
Oh, absolutely.
This feeling that like something was taken from them
Yeah.
and never given back.
Like a wound that hasn't healed.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
he's not just leaving it there. Like, he's not just opening up these old wounds.
Right.
He's actually proposing this idea of a day of historical reconciliation
Okay.
where Spain and Mexico would come together
Okay.
and like acknowledge the past
Okay.
and like try to move forward.
So like a joint ceremony?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
Very interesting idea.
Very ambitious.
It is.
Do you think Spain would go for it?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Like, what would it even look like for Spain to like genuinely reconcile
Right.
with all of that history?
Centuries of it.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is. And he doesn't stop there.
He actually says that he's putting together this list
The list.
of all of Spain's offenses against Mexico,
Oh, wow.
and that he's going to present it to them directly.
He's really going for it.
I know, it's kind of like, okay.
That's a bold move.
Yeah.
I mean, that's classic López Obrador, though, right?
Yeah,
Like, he's a master of these, like,
I was going to say.
grand gestures.
Yes.
These, like, big pronouncements to
Yeah.
get everyone's attention.
Yeah.
And, like, really frame the terms of the debate.
It's like he's calling them out
Yeah.
publicly.
Totally. And it's
Yeah.
like he's saying, like, we're not just talking anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm presenting you with the bill.
Yes, exactly.
Like, it's time to pay up.
Yeah. And he even calls out people like Mario Vargas Llosa,
Okay.
who's a writer,
Right.
who has said that he thinks Mexico should be apologizing to Spain.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's using that opposing viewpoint
Yeah, okay.
to really like, make his point.
Got it. So he's, like, using that as, like, a foil
Yeah,
to his own argument.
exactly. And it's interesting because by bringing up people like Vargas Llosa,
Yeah.
it shows that this is not just like a historical debate,
Right. Yeah.
right? It's about like different visions for Mexico's future
Yes.
and who gets to decide what that relationship
Oh,
between
yeah.
Mexico and Spain looks like.
Absolutely.
And it's like every single thing that we talk about
Yeah.
in this press conference
Mm-hmm.
comes back to this question of like power dynamics,
Totally.
right? Like who has the power,
Right.
who's pulling the strings,
And who gets to define
exactly
that relationship?
And he even uses this term. He talks about like neo-colonialism.
Neocolonialism,
Yeah.
which I think is a really important concept to understand.
Yeah, unpack that a little bit because I feel like that can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Okay, so basically he's talking about how even though Mexico is independent,
Right. Yeah.
on paper,
Right.
there are still these systems in place
Okay.
that were set up during the colonial era
Okay.
that continue to benefit,
Right.
you know?
The former colonial powers or other global powers?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So he sees it as like a continuation of exploitation.
So it's not just about like direct political control anymore.
Right.
It's about like economic and cultural influence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, for example,
Okay.
he talks a lot about the influence of multinational corporations
Right.
in
Right.
Mexico,
And how they often benefit from
Yeah.
like,
exploiting Mexican resources.
cheap labor, lax environmental regulations,
Right.
things like that.
Right, so he's drawing this direct line
Yeah.
from like the conquistadors
Yeah.
to like modern day corporations.
Exactly. And
No.
saying like this is the new face of
Yeah.
colonialism.
It's fascinating because that's an argument that you hear
yeah.
not just in Mexico, but in a lot of formerly colonized countries
Totally.
around the world.
It's like this feeling that the global system
Right.
is rigged
Yeah.
against them.
Yeah, it's like we got rid of the kings and queens.
Yeah.
But we still have like
The CEOs.
the CEOs exactly who
Yeah.
are calling the shots now.
Right. And benefiting
Yeah.
from these unequal systems.
It's a really powerful narrative.
It is. And he's very good at tapping into that.
Yeah.
Like he constantly brings it back to
Right.
the Warjen, he says.
Right, the people.
The people, right?
Yeah.
He's always framing himself as like the champion of the people,
Right.
fighting against these powerful interests
Right.
on their behalf.
Interesting.
And you can really like feel the emotion
Yeah.
in his voice when he talks about the people,
Right.
especially like, the people who supported him after the 2006 election, which
Yeah.
was very contested.
Right.
And during the drug war, like he
Yeah.
really feels for those people.
Okay.
And I think that's like a big part of his appeal.
Okay, so it's not just about like policy positions.
Right.
It's about this connection that he's built
It's the emotion.
with the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he contrasts that with his opponents,
Okay.
who he paints as like, these out-of-touch elites
Right.
who are more interested in like
Protecting their own power.
Exactly.
Or napping anyone.
than serving the people. Yeah.
Right.
It's classic populism, right?
Totally. Yeah.
This us versus them.
It's a tale as old as time,
Right.
but it's effective
It is.
because it simplifies things,
Yeah.
creates a clear enemy,
Yeah.
and it really resonates with people.
It does. And he doesn't just do it broadly.
What do you mean?
He calls people out,
Like who?
like specific journalists,
Oh, wow.
media outlets
Oh,
by name,
wow.
and accuses them of being in cahoots with these elites.
So he's really going after
Yeah.
specific people.
It's spreading misinformation. He wants people to know, like, don't be fooled by them.
Okay.
Don't be fooled by their fancy words. They were not on your side.
So he's kind of like trying to control the narrative a little bit
Right.
around his presidency.
And this is where I think some people would say, like, oh, he's a threat to freedom of the press.
Right. Okay, I can see that.
But he's quick to point out that, like,
Okay.
unlike in the past,
Okay.
these journalists have not been censored
Right.
under his administration.
Oh.
He's like, they can say whatever they want,
Okay.
but I'm going to call them out when they're wrong.
Right.
And I want the people to know
Yeah.
what their biases are.
Okay, so he's walking this fine line between
Right.
like respecting freedom of the press,
Right.
but also like pushing back
Yeah.
against what he sees as unfair coverage,
Exactly.
which is a tension that exists in democracies
Yeah.
all over the world.
It's a tough one.
It is.
But it's interesting because through all of this,
Yeah.
the accusations, the strong language,
Right.
he always comes back to his vision
Okay.
for Mexico.
And what is that vision?
He calls it the fourth transformation.
Fourth transformation.
Yeah. Have you heard him talk about this before?
Vaguely, I feel like it's come up.
It's like his big thing.
Great.
It's like this idea that he is leading Mexico
Okay.
through this transformative period,
Okay.
breaking with the past,
Right.
and creating this more just and prosperous future
Okay.
for all Mexicans.
So it's a very ambitious plan?
Oh, yeah, hugely ambitious. But he acknowledges that it's not easy
Right.
and that there are still a lot of challenges.
Of course.
He talks about violence and poverty and corruption and
Right.
how these are still major issues
Right.
in Mexico.
Right. But even with all that, he's still like optimistic
Yeah.
about the future,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
It is. And he's like, my time is almost up.
Right.
But he's already kind of like passing the torch
Okay.
to his chosen successor.
Right. Claudia Sheinbaum.
Exactly.
He's really putting a lot of weight on her shoulders.
He is. It's like he's saying, like, I'm not going to be here forever,
Right.
but she's the one to carry on this vision.
So it's interesting how he's framing this election.
Right.
It's not just about like policy differences.
Right. It's about like this whole grand vision for Mexico.
Yeah. Like, are you with me or against me, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes it really hard for anyone to like criticize him.
Right.
Without sounding like they're against this like
Right, yeah.
utopian future.
Like you're on the wrong side of history if you disagree with me.
Exactly.
That's a powerful tactic.
It is. And, to his credit,
Okay.
he does acknowledge
Okay.
that not everyone is like totally on board with
Right.
this whole fourth transformation thing.
Okay.
He even says like, I apologize to those who feel hurt by my policies.
Oh, wow. So he is willing to like admit that like maybe
Yeah.
not everything has been perfect.
It's a surprisingly like conciliatory tone
It is.
for someone who's like known for being very combative, right? It's like, I'm sorry if you feel that way,
Yeah.
but I was doing what I thought was right.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a bold strategy.
It is. And it's like, even in that apology,
Yeah.
he's not backing down
Okay.
at all. Like
Yeah.
he's still totally convinced
Yeah.
that he's right.
Okay.
And that this is the path for Mexico.
So are there any concrete examples
Yeah.
in this part of the press conference where he does that, where he's like apologizing,
Yeah.
but also like doubling down?
So he talks about wanting to provide free public Wi-Fi,
Okay, that's interesting.
which like, okay, sounds great.
Yeah, free Wi-Fi. Who doesn't love that?
Right. But he's like,
Wow.
I'm being blocked by the regulatory body,
Okay.
who are, of course,
You're, of course.
in the pocket of the telecom companies.
Right. Of course. There it is.
So it's like, even when he's talking about something,
Yeah.
that seems like a positive thing.
Right.
He finds a way to tie it back
Right.
to this like,
To the bigger narrative.
yeah, like corruption and like special interests and all that.
So even free Wi-Fi is a battle
It's all connected.
in this larger struggle.
Exactly, yeah. And he's fighting that battle.
He's fighting the good fight.
For the people.
For the people.
Of course.
Always for the people.
So, I don't know about you, but, like, listening to this guy,
Yeah.
you can't help but be like,
It's a lot.
it's a lot, right?
It's a lot of like...
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Passion.
Yeah.
Conviction.
Yes.
Like I said, he's a very polarizing figure.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You either love him or you hate him.
Right.
But I don't think anyone would disagree that he is. He's a force.
A force to be reckoned with.
Exactly.
Like, he has undeniably
He's shaking things up.
shaken things up.
Yes.
And like...
For better or for worse.
Yeah, and I think regardless of where you fall on that spectrum,
Right.
it's important to understand, like,
Yeah.
where he's coming
For
from.
what he's trying to do.
Exactly, because it helps you understand,
Yeah.
like, the bigger picture
Yeah.
in Mexico.
Totally. And, like, what might happen next.
Exactly. So I think that's, like, a good takeaway from this whole press conference.
Yeah. What do you think, Renner? Any big takeaways for you?
Anything that surprised you
What are you going to be watching for?
in this upcoming election?
Yeah, this has been a wild ride.
This is like a crash course
I know.
in Mexican politics.
From corruption to colonialism
To Wi-Fi,
to free Wi-Fi.
it's all connected.
It really is all connected.
In the mind of López Obrador.
This is why we do these deep dives.
It's fascinating.
So fascinating.
I love it.
All right, learner. Well, that is going to do it for us today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep your eyes on Mexico, everybody.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
For sure.